to start out with the end of our cord, and the cord that we want to have a nice long piece of cord or rope, and we want also a very long piece of yarn. So I usually do arm to arm, outstretched 2 or 3 times so that you have a good amount. And we're going to tie our piece of yarn onto the end of our cord. And we don't want it all the way on the end. We want it about probably an inch or inch and a half in. Inch and a half will probably be just fine. And you can just eyeball it. You don't have to measure it. So there we go. And you'll end up with a little piece, and then you'll have a long piece. Now on the long piece, we want to take this all the way down to the end, and we want to thread a needle through there. However, we won't really be paying attention to this end for a little while. So we're just going to leave this here and go back to this end. Now on this end we have, again, our little piece, and our little piece we're going to just hold along the long end of our rope, and then the longer end of yarn we're going to use to wrap our cord out almost to the end. We don't want to go all the way to the end, but almost to the end. About there is fine. Now this is going to be a little tricky. We are going to bend this wrapped part into a U, and it's a little difficult to do. You have to be a little forceful with it. And you want to pinch it so that it's nice and tight, almost like a little roly-poly bug. And then you're going to wrap over those 2 pieces. So you have to wrap it really tightly. So do that so that that's held together. And then we're going to keep wrapping, but we're going to only wrap on the 1 piece of cord. So I'm wrapping on this 1 piece of cord, and notice how I still have this little piece of cord, or little piece of yarn, that I have held against my piece of cord here. So as I'm wrapping that cord, it covers that little piece from where I tied that on. So I'm wrapping this, and I want to wrap to about 10 to 15. So 10 to 15 wraps on there. And then I'm going to curve this. So we're making a spiral. So I'm curving this, and then whatever end, like if we're wrapping up and over, which we are here, I'm going to then go through, move this so I can see here, go through the center of my spiral. So I'm going to go up, over, and down through that center. Now I've noticed I'm kind of losing some of this yarn here. We can always go over that later, so you really do need to try to get this as close as possible, but if you have a little mistake like that, we can fix it up later, but it does take some time. So if you can try to prevent those mistakes as you're going along, try to do that. So now I've just gone over, notice that I have gone back through that center point. So I've gone over this one into here. Now even though I've gone over the center point, you're not going to go into the center each time that you do this, because as we keep going, this will eventually start to get wider than just these 2 spots, just this 1, 2. So we're going to have to wrap it so that it just goes over 2 pieces of cord, and that will, here it's our 1, 2. If we have a 3rd piece here, that'll just be over the 3rd piece and the 2nd piece, okay? So again, you're just going to kind of curve this into that spiral, hold it, which is a little tricky to do, and then go over the closest piece of cord to it. And just kind of try to take your time so that you can get that rope or get that yarn positioned in the right spot. So there you can see that's the start of a spiral. Here's another one that's equally kind of in the same area. Now we can also add some different widths of cord to our little spiral that we're making here, or eventually it will be a bowl. And here you can see I have made one where, or I've started one here where I've started with the little coil and I've added the thicker coil. So in order to add the thicker coil, I'm just going to show you how to do that here, and then I'm going to transition over to that other piece so I can kind of show you a couple of other steps that you can take. So I've got these 2 pieces. I'm going to just put them right up next to each other, and I'm going to take just some regular old masking tape, It's easier said than done to rip that. And I'm going to start just on one piece here, kind of spiraling it down. As it gets closer to that little piece, I'm going to hold that on there and then spiral those together. Now, I usually like to add more than just this one because sometimes that won't give you an adequate, secure kind of base to add that string. So I usually go back the other way. So then I start on the smaller cord, start to wrap that around and spiral that down the other way. Now if you find that you've done this and you still see a little bit of the cord, then just keep doing that until you have that all covered up. So I could kind of go back, just kind of cover that up in that spot and then kind of squeeze it together. It doesn't have to look pretty because you will be covering it up, but it is just important to know how to do that. So now I could keep wrapping this, and as I wrap that all the way out, eventually I'm going to have something that looks like this. Now there's a couple things also that you need to know how to do as you're continuing this out. I want to show you how to attach a new piece of yarn because as you can see that's something that you're going to have to do as well. Now you don't have to switch it every time like I've done here, but you do want to use a couple different pieces of yarn because it makes it more interesting. So you may find that you just want to do one main color and then do like a border at the top and the bottom in a different color, or there's many different varieties of or combinations that you can do with color, but you do want to know how to switch when it's time. So what you'll notice that I've done here is I'm taken my new color of yarn and I've just tied it to the cord. And then I've taken my little piece, I still have a little piece left from my previous yarn, and you do want to have a little piece hanging over. And I'm tying those two together, but make sure that you tie that new piece to the actual cord before you start. So I'm tying those two together, and I'm going to hold these along the side here. Oh, there's my needle. And notice that by holding them along the side, as I start to wrap this again, and make sure that you take note of which direction you were wrapping in because that's really important too. But as you start wrapping this again, you'll be able to wrap right over the top of those two pieces of yarn that you have. So now, whenever you add a new piece of yarn, you have to go back and thread the end of that so that you can keep stitching. So one other thing that you'll notice that I'm starting to do now that I want to show you is if we just kept going with a spiral, we would have like a coaster, but we want to start kind of slowly forming that up. You don't want it to be too dramatic so it'll kind of pull in too far, but you want to slowly kind of angle that as you're stitching your piece of thread or your piece of yarn over. So I have to hold it in place to make sure that that's going to do what I want, and then stitch over those two pieces of cord. So again, remember that as you're going along with this as well, you want to start counting. So I think 10 to 15 is a good number. You don't probably want to go past 15 because then that would be too spread out and you wouldn't have a very good structural bowl. So I'm going to count 10. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm going to now stitch again. It's really important, especially as you're starting to build this bowl up, that you are paying attention to the number of times that you're stitching because people will see those sides of the bowl and because you want to have enough stitches to keep the form. And as you can see, it starts to kind of have a mind of its own. This cord is really kind of tough, so I think we're at 4 here. So you have to hold it in place when you get ready to stitch it. 8, 9, 10. Okay, so I'm going to hold that back up, stitch that through, and remember you're just going over the 2. And if you see that you have things kind of separating, you can kind of start to pull those back together. There we go. So take the time to do that. I'm kind of rushing through this as I'm showing you, but 3, 4, but you guys take your time. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is basically it. You're going to use this technique all the way up. And a little word to the wise, if you do attach a thicker piece of cord, you want to make sure that wherever, like I've started my attachment here, so if I wanted to end and switch to a shorter piece of cord, I'd want to do it roughly in the same spot so that I don't have a really uneven bowl at the end. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Couple other things to remember with this is that when you're actually wrapping, a lot of people try to wrap like this, holding this, and then trying to wrap around, and notice how you kind of get stuck and then you have to switch your hands again. So one way to do this is to hold the long end with whatever hand you're not wrapping with, and the spiral should be kind of at the end. And then you can just wrap right over the top of the spiral, kind of take it around that spiral, and it goes a lot faster. So now we're ready to finish our bowls, and we should be at the point where we have just a little bit more to wrap. So once you're at this point, what you want to do is continue to wrap until you're about a 1/4 inch out from the end of the bowl. So I'm just going to continue wrapping here. And once I'm about a 1/4 inch from the end of the coil, I am going to start wrapping over 2 each time. So 2 coils each time. And so I'm just going to stitch through, tighten that, pull that over, and then just keep going. So each one I'm going to stitch over. And you're just going to continue this until you get as far as you can go. Because you'll realize that once you get really close to the end, the yarn might just kind of fall down to the first coil. So do it as far as you can without that yarn falling over. And then once you've gone over 2 the last time, then you're ready to do the next step. So there we've got it all wrapped. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take that yarn, and instead of going over the 2, we're going to go around here, so just kind of over the side of it, so it'll go in front of that cord, and we're going to go over the stitches that we just made. So, you know, if we look here, here are our stitches that we've just made, and I'm going to go beyond those, whoops, wrong spot, I'm going to go beyond those and through those 2 coils there, so that it's going to wrap right around those stitches that we just made. And then I'm going to do that again. And as I'm doing this, I'm kind of raising up the yarn on the end of that coil. So keep going. I'm going to take this down so you can see, so that it's kind of covering up that end. And kind of move it to get it to where you want, so that you get something like that. Now, when you're done, we've got to kind of think about how to finish this off. So what we're going to do is here on the inside of the bowl, we're going to just stitch through some of the stitches that we've already made. And this is where it helps to have a little bit of a sharp needle. Mine's a little dull. If you have a sharper needle for this point, it kind of helps. And we're going to stitch until we see a little U or a little circle here. And then we're going to stick our needle back through the circle and then continue to pull until we basically get a knot. Now, just for safety's sake, just to make sure that we're really knotted there, I'm going to do it one more time. Pull the string until we get a little circle, stick the needle back through, pull until you get a knot. Then again, just to make sure that we are good, I'm going to go ahead and just stitch through a couple of these coils again before I cut my yarn off, and that'll just make sure that, you know, we've got a nice tight kind of coiled area before we cut this off. And then just to make sure that I don't have anything sticking out of the side here, I'm going to stitch back through those original stitches that I made. And this may look a little different for you. You kind of decide where the best place to stitch through would be. And then I'm going to trim this off so that I end up with a nice finished end to my bowl. Now, if you look inside your bowl and you see that you can still see this interior part, if that's really bothering you, you can get some of the same colored yarn and go back and stitch through some of those spots just to cover that up. If you see any spots on the outside of your bowl, like right here, sometimes just kind of going through and either using the end of a needle or using just your fingers and kind of pushing a little bit of that yarn, kind of pulling both of those pieces over until they kind of cover up that spot, which is sometimes easier said than done. But that can also kind of create a covering for like little tiny gaps in your yarn that you see as you go along. But basically that's it. So good luck and make some beautiful bowls.